I'm in the veggie garden today with a view to maximising my growing space. Now, while I do have a fairly large garden, there are areas of the garden that really need a bit of managing before they're ready to take in small seedlings. There's the old summer veggie gardens like this zucchini bed, and the tomato patch. The tomatoes definitely just about finished, need to be cleared, and the garden's renovated before I can get anything planted. Now, if you want to eat from your garden, you've got to consistently be planting for your garden. Now, you can direct plant or you can plant seeds in containers and then transplant them out. Now, I've been trying to grow a lot more little plants from seed this way, and I'll leave a link in the description to my snail videos. It's a really great way to be growing your seedlings. But now I've got all these little plants, I've got to get them into the garden somewhere. I've always been hesitant to harvest things like cabbages too early. In my mind, if I've left them longer, they'll get bigger and I can grab them then. But by that time, these smaller cabbages will also be ready, so I'll be inundated with cabbages. So I've got to kind of train myself to take some of the produce before it kind of seems really ready, because you're going to be having plenty down the track. Now, I've got these greenacre cabbages here. I've got Savoy cabbages in another area of the garden, and at the start of the garden I've got more of these little greenacre. So I think there'll be plenty of cabbages coming along. It occurred to me, if I take this cabbage now, it would leave quite a bit of space around it to transplant new plants for future cabbages. So it's a bit of a win-win. Not a huge cabbage, but I think there's plenty of food in there for me. Once harvested, it's easy just to replace it with one of my new little cabbage seedlings. But what about all the rest of them? Well, that's prompted me to have a look around. Now, these are huge, big cauliflower plants. There's purple variety and also a green variety. And because they're quite tall, I think now I can squeeze in some seedlings just around the base of them. By the time those little plants are kind of this big, these plants will have been harvested and kind of removed, so that will give them plenty of space. And through winter, they won't grow as quickly anyway. So I think it's time to add a couple of these little plants into each of those gardens. I've got the red cabbage, and this is a wombok, which is a Chinese cabbage. So we'll get a couple of these little plants. I'm just going to sneak out some at the start of my little snail and find homes for them. And I'll just wrap them up again. And the same with these womboks. And we can look after those leftovers. I think I can squeeze in two of these little wombok plants just in this section here. One here and one at the back there. By the time this little one gets big, the surrounding cabbage and cauliflower plant will be finished and long ago enjoyed. So there'll be plenty of space for this plant to grow. And there's room for a couple more down this end. And I can squeeze in a couple next to my just harvested cabbage. One on either side of it, I think will go okay. So that's a few cabbage plants added to this garden bed. And I might just squeeze the other little red cabbages into this one. Just have to get some weeds out of the way. That's one. Two. And I think the third one can go down this end. They look fairly minuscule in this garden next to these larger plants, but it's these larger plants that help feed the soil food web in this area and make the conditions probably a little bit more favourable for small plants like this one to get going. As I've mentioned in a recent video, the soil food web helps support our plants, and the plants in turn help support the soil food web. It's kind of a bit of a cyclical situation. These guys feed sugars down to the the organisms in the soil, and then they go and get the minerals that these plants require to be healthy, strong growing plants. So in my mind, by adding these little plants in amongst a garden that's still got plants growing and feeding the soil food web, it's kind of planting it into soil that's more likely to be able to nurture them and look after them. And if we have a look around other areas of the garden where it's just been left to do its own thing, the plants are pretty happy with growing next to lots of other plants. They kind of just find their way in the space. So that's another reason why I'm just going to trial shoving these little plants in amongst all the others, because I think they'll do pretty well. Another bed in which I think we can maximise our production is in this garlic and spinach bed. I only had a few spinach plants to sneak into here a few weeks ago, but I've grown some more, and I reckon there's plenty of room to grow some spinach before the garlic grows up and needs kind of a bit more space. So I'm going to just sort of sneak all of these little plants into this garden. Oh, and once again, we've got some nice little plants in here. So let's sneak these in. I'm just going to try clumping the little plants and see how that goes. So this is about 3 little plants going in here. I don't want to damage the roots. They're growing closely together. But I reckon they'll do okay with their friends next to them. With those extra little plants in there now, we'll get a lot more spinach out of this space. We are heading into winter here, but you know, it's hard to know what the weather's going to do. Next week we've got some 19-degree temperatures, so there's still some warm weather left before we really hit the cold, which is probably around August. But hopefully we will have had a harvest of spinach before then. The next seedling that looks like it needs to get into the ground are these bok choy plants. Now, bok choy seedlings seem to be the favourite of pests in my garden. I've been growing seedlings over a number of months and getting them planted into the ground, but they seem to be mowed down fairly quickly after I do that. I do have some successful plants in the Asian green department. I've got some beautiful red, I think they're probably pak choy. I've got some little tatsoi that are coming along, and maybe some of the bok choy, but I've just determined to kind of keep going, growing the seedlings and planting them out to give me the best chance to get some of these lovely greens growing in my garden. So today we're going to get these planted, added to this garden bed here. Now I'm not going to really worry about how densely I plant these, because it's going to be a while before these brassicas get big, and hopefully if these don't get mowed down by pests, they'll be ready a lot quicker. Now again, I might just, rather than pull that apart and damage roots, I'll leave those 2 plants together and we'll plant them as a clump. I was just starting to weed this little area of the garden to get my bok choy in, but notice all of these little plants are actually coriander. My coriander plant, I didn't harvest the seeds in time and a lot of them dropped off in this area. So we're just going to have some nice little herbs growing. I think I can sneak some in just here and they can grow nicely with the coriander. Okay, that's another bed a little bit more filled, and hopefully they'll do okay there. Now it's not only seedlings that I've grown myself that I want to kind of put in the garden to maximise the space, but it's also some of the opportunities that my garden gives me. Here I've had a seeding parsnip plant, And the plants are growing really close to each other, and I don't think they're going to develop a really big root if they are kind of squashed in as much as they are. So I'm going to try and take some of these plants and put them just on the other side where they're going to get a lot more sun and opportunity to grow during winter. Now I know it's not a great idea to go transplanting root crops because they don't always transplant well. But some of these plants are quite small, and I think if I can dig deep enough, get that root without damaging it, it might transplant to its new location okay. But I'm going to just give it a try. Now I think most of these are probably a bit too big and I've missed the opportunity, but I've still got kind of tiny little ones like this coming up that I might be able to successfully move. Now I dug that up with the intention of leaving a lot of the soil around it, but it kind of just fell off. But maybe if I can just transfer that carefully so that that goes straight down into the ground, we might get a parsnip, but we'll see. Now parsnip plants are fairly slow growing, and I think by the time they're big, these brassica plants will be finished, so we don't have to worry about that too much. Now I'm just going to make sure I dig deep, get these roots in nice and straight, and give it its best chance. Now I don't know if this is a good idea, I'm just giving it a try. Now if we're looking for a backup plan, you can see here there's some little parsnip seeds. I could just grab some of those and just kind of scatter them around my little plant as well as an insurance policy. I've popped in a few little plants here and there. Now the roots might be distorted because we've dug them up, but we'll just kind of see. And as for these plants that are too big to move, I might just thin them out now, just to ensure that we get something worth harvesting. To finish off the video, I'm just going to grab a few things to make a coleslaw with that lovely cabbage that I harvested, starting with a few of these spring onions. I'll just dig some of them out. And some carrots. And the last thing we need is a couple of these kale leaves. And I think all of that is going to make a really lovely coleslaw. Well, isn't this what veggie gardening's all about? Being able to eat produce like this straight out of your garden. And by maximising your growing space, you're ensuring that you never run out. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thanks so much for watching. If you have enjoyed it, please remember to give it a like and let me know in the comments what you're growing at the moment.